Well, so far we have a clear message from Josep Borrell, the EU's top diplomat. He chaired that meeting, and it can best be summarised by saying the EU ministers were agreed that Israel has a right to defend itself, but that right has limits. That is the summary of what Josep Borrell said, making it very clear that the condemnation of Hamas's terror attack against Israeli civilians was without question for European ministers, and that they stand by that right of self-defence by Israel. But really, the focus appears to be shifting towards the humanitarian situation in Gaza, and Josep Borrell making it very clear that cutting water, cutting electricity is not abiding with international law, and those need to be restored as quickly as possible. In the case of Gaza, that also means restoring the supply of fuel, because that is how the electricity and some of the drinking water is provided in the Strip. So that is the strong language from Josep Borrell, making it clear. As you said, they were also behind the scenes discussing Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary-General's proposal for a humanitarian pause of the violence in Gaza at the moment. Now, that will not be decided by the foreign ministers. It'll be decided by their bosses, the heads of state and government, which are meeting who are meeting in Brussels later this week at the European Council. So that's something to look forward to. But clearly a united position, at least on that right of Israel to defend itself and the limits within international law. And it's a move by EU foreign ministers to also be consistent in their messaging, both in the situation in the Middle East and in the situation in Ukraine as well. So that's the clear message from EU foreign ministers, and we'll hear more from their bosses in a few days.
Mm-hmm. And Alex, you mentioned Ukraine. The conflict in the Middle East is not the only item on the agenda. Security issues closer to home also discussed.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Part of European security will be the fact that President Erdogan of Turkey has moved Sweden's application to NATO to the Turkish parliament. Now, that is a parliament controlled by a majority of his own party, so you would imagine that it could go through relatively easily. It has to go through a final approval vote as well. Now, the timeline on that isn't very clear, but we've just heard from Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary-General of NATO, who will be in Sweden tomorrow to meet the Swedish Prime Minister. He said he welcomes that move and looks forward to a speedy ratification. So certainly the pressure on Turkey there to get this done and dusted. Questions remain about the timeline and about whether or not Hungary will now lift its objection as well. So that is something that we'll be monitoring as well. Now, the foreign ministers had a lot on their plate. Of course, Ukraine and Russia's invasion were crucial. EU diplomats wanting to make it very clear that they are not fatiguing. They don't have any issues with supporting Israel's right to defend itself and having their attention focused on the Middle East, and also supporting Ukraine in the face of Russian invaders. Also on the agenda, Armenia, preventing an escalation there with Azerbaijan possibly moving into Armenian territory, preventing an escalation between Serbia and Kosovo, and preventing further coups d'etats, further escalation in the Sahel region of Africa. So certainly a very busy meeting for those foreign ministers of the EU.